You're flat on your back in a pitch-black forest, and it's so dead quiet you swear you can hear your own heartbeat. Then, bam, a whisper slices through the dark. Just this weird swoosh, like a broomstick swiping the sky. You barely have time to blink before the ground around you is exploding in fire. The Nazis used to call them Nachthexen, night witches. Not some ghost story either. Real women. Soviet women, flying rickety old planes, dropping bombs like silent grim reapers. Wild, right? Anyway, buckle up. This is their story. You're tuned into War Files Uncovered, where we drag history's creepiest war secrets back into the light. Want more forgotten tales? Hit that subscribe button and come get lost with us in the weird, shadowy corners of the past. Winter 1942, Russian steppe. It's not even winter. It's a full-on curse. Snow everywhere, like you can't even find the ground. Everything's muted, dead quiet, except out west, where the front lines are straight up hell. There, silence is a pipe dream. The German army's chewing up Soviet land, and every night it's just nonstop artillery and explosions. But then, in the middle of all that noise, there's something else, something off. German soldiers used to laugh when they first heard it. This soft, fluttery rustle overhead, like fabric wings, just gliding by. It sounded goofy, like some witch riding her broom. Then out of nowhere, the bombs start dropping. The ground would shake as these little Soviet biplanes, honestly, they looked more like barn junk than actual planes, rained fire. No armor, no radar, not even parachutes. These things were basically flying wooden crates. You'd think the Germans would have just swatted them out of the sky, right? Nope. Because when the night witches showed up, there was no siren, no roaring engines, just total silence, then chaos. Here's the kicker. This whole saga doesn't start with explosions. It starts with people not believing. In 41, when the Nazis invaded, Soviet men rushed off to fight. Women wanted in too, but the brass was like, yeah, sure, go patch people up, but leave the fighting to the guys. Enter Marina Reskova, basically the Soviet Union's own Amelia Earhart. She wasn't having it. She went straight to Stalin, asked for women's combat regiments, and shockingly, he said yes. Not just one either. 3. The most famous? The 588th Night Bomber Regiment. Spoiler, you're going to remember that name. Volunteers poured in from everywhere. Teenage girls, teachers, farmers, you name it. Some were barely 17. The uniforms were so big they had to stuff their boots with whatever they could find. They chopped off their hair, cinched their belts, lugged around rifles bigger than their arms. But man, the fire in their eyes? You could probably see it from Berlin. Their male comrades made fun of them at first. Little girls playing war. But yeah, that didn't last. Pretty soon, those guys were whispering their names like they were legends. Training was brutal. These women learned to fly ancient Polikarpov Po-2 biplanes. Antiques, basically. Open cockpit, easy target for anyone with a decent aim. Still, they figured out how to make that work. The Po-2s could fly so slow and low that German fighters just couldn't catch them. And when the pilots cut the throttle, total silence. The Nazis would scan the sky and see nothing. Then boom, fire raining down, out of nowhere. Come spring 42, they were ready, painted up their planes, scribbled smack talk on their bombs, and went on missions nobody thought they'd survive. They flew at night, in pitch black, with just maps and memory. No radios, no parachutes. If they got hit, that was it. Pilot and navigator gone together, but they just kept flying, over and over. 3, 4, 8 times a night. They barely slept, got frostbite so bad their fingers went black, faces shredded by the freezing wind. And when the sun came up, back at it again, no hesitation. Seriously, the night witches were hardcore. The Germans? Oh, they had no clue what hit them. At first, these attacks just seemed like some random late-night nuisance. Annoying, sure, but nothing to write home about. A couple sleepless nights, some rattled nerves, but barely a scratch. Then, all hell broke loose. Suddenly, their ammo blew sky high, command tents torched, fuel gone in a flash. The night witches weren't just poking the bear. They were breaking its legs. Took the Germans a minute, but eventually they caught on. Every time they heard that soft whoosh above, their skin crawled. Noctexan, they started calling them. Night witches. Superstitious bunch, those guys. Probably picturing these women riding broomsticks across the moon. One German survivor straight up said waiting for them was worse than getting shelled or tanked. Imagine that. Can't shoot what you can't see. The quiet itself just gnawed at your nerves. 3 in the morning, 4, and they're all lying there wide-eyed, staring into the black, waiting for that ghostly whisper. Once it started, forget about getting back to sleep. Thing is, for the women in those cockpits, every single run was a coin toss with death. Their planes? Tiny creaky things barely holding together. Just 2 bombs each. To make even a dent, they had to fly over and over, dozens of times a night. Every searchlight that swept the sky, every burst of flak meant another brush with disaster. Sometimes the planes just didn't come back. Burned out husks left in the snow, bodies frozen stiff. But the ones who made it home, they got mad, they got even. They pushed harder, flew further. Every loss just stoked the fire. By the end of those first months, it wasn't just the Germans whispering about them. Soviet troops were passing stories too. Guys who'd once laughed at the idea of women in combat, now they just watched, mouths hanging open. The night witches turned into something out of a fever dream, haunting the darkness, making the night itself an enemy. The war was nowhere near over, but this was just the opening act. Because while everyone else tried to sleep, the night witches, yeah, they were out there, sharpening their broomsticks. And that eerie whisper in the night, it was only getting harder to ignore. Man, summer 42 was like the world itself couldn't shake the stink of gunpowder and sweat. War everywhere, villages just quietly smoldering. Rivers choked with sludge and oil, and the sky always bleeding red far off on the edge. Down south, where the Germans kept grinding towards Stalingrad, the 588th Night Bomber Regiment, yeah, the Night Witches, were gearing up for hellish flights. Their old Po-2 biplanes lined up like skeletons on dirt strips, wings catching a little moonlight, looking way too breakable for what was coming. Mechanics shuffled around, hands gone numb, patching up holes with whatever they could find, muttering half prayers under their breath before every takeoff. Every night, these women basically walked straight into the dark, and honestly, who could blame them for being scared? It always started real quiet. Navigators hunched over battered maps, lanterns flickering, tracing out enemy lines with shaky fingers. Pilots buckled in, leather helmets shoved down, hoping the wind wouldn't slice right through them. The airfield just reeked of oil and cordite, and somewhere behind the trees, you'd hear artillery thumping like angry gods. Then, one by one, the Po-2s spluttered awake, engines coughing and spitting, props spinning, the whole plane shaking like it wanted to bolt for home. But up they went anyway, rattling into that monster of a sky. For these women, the cockpit was a coffin with wings. Simple as that. The Po-2 was barely more than patched up twigs and canvas. If a bullet even glanced at it, the whole thing tore apart like wet paper. And the cold? Brutal. At 3,000 feet, the wind smacked you in the face, turned your breath to icicles, and froze the blood right out of your fingertips. Controls slipped. You lost feeling in your hands, but quitting just wasn't an option. So they gritted their teeth and hung on. The way they did it wasn't fancy, but it worked. 3 planes at a time. 2 would dive in first, catching all the flak and tracer fire, basically saying, "Hey, look over here." Meanwhile, the 3rd would kill the engine, glide in dead silent. All you'd hear was a whisper of wind. And by the time the Germans realized, bombs were already falling. Supply dumps, fuel tanks, command posts, gone in a flash of heat and light. Then, engines roaring, the women yanked their planes skyward and vanished before anyone could scramble a fighter. And they did this over and over. Take off, bomb, vanish, repeat. Some nights they'd squeeze in 10 runs before the sun even thought about rising. Every mission? Total dice roll. When they stumbled back, faces washed out, lips split, and hands bleeding from the cold, there was no crash out and nap. Nope, they loaded up again. Back into the sky. But danger stuck to them like a shadow. Death was basically a crew member. One night, Olga Samferova's plane got caught in the German spotlights. Suddenly, it was like a theater up there, tracer rounds weaving a web around her espionage. The Po-2 tried to wriggle away, but then, boom, one burst hit, flames licking up the wings, the whole thing tumbling down like a shooting star. Her friends kept flying, tears frozen to their cheeks, no way to even wipe them away. Still, weirdly enough, every time they lost someone, the rest got tougher. By autumn, even the Germans were rattled. They called them Nachthexen, night witches. Whisper of canvas wings had grown into some kind of terror spell. Soldiers claimed the women didn't need eyes, that they flew with the devil or something. Truth was, it was guts, not magic. But here's the thing nobody talks about. Behind all the legend, these were just young women, kids almost, dragging around all this fear and hope. Between runs, they'd huddle underground, gnawing on crusts of bread, soup barely warm, sewing uniforms 3 sizes too big, patching boots with whatever. Some clung to lucky trinkets, a photo, a cross, a ribbon. Some figured luck was for other people. At night, guns quiet for like 5 minutes, they'd whisper the names of the ones who didn't come back. Then they'd pull on their helmets and head out again, because that's just what you did. Man, autumn 1942 was just pure chaos. Stalingrad was a hellhole. And the night witches? They weren't just buzzing around for fun anymore. They turned into straight-up nightmare fuel. German supply lines? Toast. Ammo dumps popped off like twisted fireworks, so the poor German grunts up front were left shaking empty rifles. Fuel tanks went up so fast, you'd blink and see nothing but scorched earth and dead tanks sinking into the mud. Officers lost their minds, troops freaked out, and all night long, those canvas wings just kept whispering through the dark. Honestly, if you were German, you probably didn't sleep at all. But damn, it cost them. Planes wrecked all over, bodies frozen where they fell, fields and forests basically turned into graveyards. Back home, families got those brutal, "Your daughter died a hero of the motherland" telegrams. Cold, state-issued, no room for real grief. The ones who survived, no time to mourn. They had to get back in the cockpit night after night, like grief was a luxury they couldn't afford. By the time winter rolled around, Germans were literally terrified of the night witches. Couldn't even hear them coming till it was too late. And the Soviets, well, they finally got what they had unleashed. Suddenly, everyone in the Red Army was telling stories about these women. Guys who'd laughed about girls in planes started whispering their names like prayers. They weren't just girls anymore. They were witches, warriors, living legends. And up in those frozen Stalingrad skies, their story was just catching fire. Winter 1942 melts into 43 in the Eastern Front. Man, it's just hell on earth. Stalingrad's nothing but a scrapyard of frozen tanks and half-starved ghosts picking through broken bricks. And right in the thick of that mess, the night witches buzzing overhead, doing their whole dancing with death routine every damn night. By now, everybody knows them. The Germans curse their names, and back home, folks whisper legends. Sounds romantic, right? But under all that myth and glory, these were real women, flesh and blood, with stories smudged across the sky in engine smoke. Take Nadezhda Popova, 19, already lost her brother to the Nazis, house burned to cinders. She's got these soft eyes. Looks like she should be reading poetry, not dodging flak in a rickety Po-2. But in the cockpit, she's a demon. German searchlights snap on, slice through the dark, catch her plane dead center. Flak bursts everywhere, shrapnel snapping past. Does she panic? Nah. She shoves the stick forward, drops her crate into a screaming dive, wood frame rattling like it's gonna fall apart, bombs away, yanks up just above the trees, and poof, gone. Plane's got more holes than a sieve when she lands. But Popova just grins, shrugs, and mutters, "Tonight we live." Like it's nothing. And then there's Bershinskaya, the boss. She's all sharp lines and steel nerves, never smiles, but the whole squad sticks together because of her. She soaks up every piece of bad news so the rest can keep flying. When one of the planes doesn't come back, you'll find her standing at the runway, boots frozen to the ground, just waiting. Sometimes, miracle of miracles, you'll see that battered plane crawling home at sunrise. Other times, nothing. And she just turns away, stone-faced. No tears. At least, not where anyone can see. The Luftwaffe starts getting clever, sending out Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs just to hunt the witches. Those German planes are fast as hell. Meanwhile, the Po-2s chug along like flying bathtubs. The joke's on the Germans, though. Sometimes being slow actually saves your skin. The enemy zooms right past, too fast to get a bead. The women drop down, skim the treetops, duck into gullies where the big boys can't follow. A few even cut their engines and just glide through the dark until the hunters give up and peel away. But yeah, not everyone makes it. Yevgenia Zhigalenko, one of the baby-faced navigators, watched friends get shot out of the sky, planes burning, girls screaming, all that. One night she saw two of her own go down in flames, and instead of crashing, they aimed straight for a German convoy, taking some bastards with them in a final fiery nosedive. Tell me that's not guts. Still, even in all that chaos and horror, there's this weird softness. Before missions, the girls would braid each other's hair, swap candy, hum old songs in the dugouts. They were just kids, really. Traded school books for bombers. Some carried lipstick, put it on before flying, like sticking a middle finger up at death. They whispered about boys, about maybe seeing peace again someday. It's wild. Girls barely out of childhood, living like shadows. Pretty soon, they're legends out of control. German propaganda tries to write them off. But ask any frontline grunt and you'll hear the truth. Those nights are pure torture. Waiting, then sudden fire, then dead silence. Somebody found a German soldier's diary after the war. He wrote, "The witches have come again. I cannot sleep. I cannot breathe. I am afraid to close my eyes." Yeah, that's fear right there. Man, their legend just exploded. People at the front swapped stories like campfire tales, while German propaganda tried to brush them off as nothing but a nuisance. Yeah, good luck with that. Truth was, the soldiers in the trenches knew better. They'd talk about those nights like they were some kind of waking nightmare. So much waiting it'd drive you nuts. Sudden flashes and gunfire in the dark. And then that awful, buzzing silence. There's this one diary from a German soldier found after the war, real bleak stuff. He scribbled, "The witches have come again. I cannot sleep. I cannot breathe. I am afraid to close my eyes." Gives you chills, right? But the so-called witches, they weren't under any illusions. Every flight could be the last. Take Nadezhda Popova, for example. One night her plane got chewed up so bad by bullets, it's a miracle she made it back at all. She was soaked in fuel, glass cuts everywhere. But when someone asked her how many runs she'd pulled off that night, no hesitation. 8, like it was just another Tuesday. By 43, those women had racked up thousands of sorties, dumped over 3,000 tons of bombs. No joke. They hit everything, rail lines, fuel dumps, ammo depots, just hammering the Germans where it hurt. Every mission was another crack in that supposedly unstoppable Wehrmacht. Soviet brass, who'd once raised eyebrows at the idea of women flyers, started singing their praises. Medals, radio shoutouts, the works. Their story got stitched right into the resistance itself. But you know what medals can't do? They don't stop friends from dying. By spring, the regiment's graveyard was filling up. Wooden crosses poking out of the frozen ground, some graves marked with nothing but a rag or a busted propeller. Still, the ones left had to keep flying. Grief wasn't allowed to win. Every time they climbed into those cockpits, they took bombs, sure, but they also carried the weight of everyone they'd lost. Every mission, there were names etched a little deeper into the night sky. To the Germans, the sound of those broomsticks was a curse. To the Soviets, pure guts and defiance. But for the women themselves, it was survival, plain and simple. They weren't witches. They were daughters, sisters, lovers, fighters. And as 43 dragged on, they weren't going anywhere. The night was theirs, and their whispers were only getting louder. By the summer of 43, the whole mess on the Eastern Front was spinning out of control for the Germans. All that Nazi swagger? Gone, buried somewhere under the ice and rubble of Stalingrad. That city, God, it was just bones and bricks by then. The Soviets had held on by their fingernails, and the land itself seemed to remember. And above all that haunted ground, you had these badass women, the night witches, swooping in and out, basically setting fire to German nerves with every run. They'd been through hell already, frozen winters that chewed through boots and bodies, night fighters chasing them like hounds, flax so thick you could almost walk on it. Yet here they were, gearing up for round 2, or was it 20? The Red Army was bracing for another big push, and of course someone had to make the night bleed. That was their job. Then July rolled in, sticky and electric. Kursk, 3 in the damn morning, and the Soviet airfields were buzzing like a kicked hornet's nest. The Germans had brought a metal army, tanks for days, all lined up for a punch they figured would end it. But tanks need gas, shells, smokes, and more smokes. Cut the supply line and you cut the teeth. The night witches knew the drill. Po-2s, those rickety wooden little planes that looked like they belonged at a barnstorming fair, creaked into the night. Bombs strapped on, no fancy gear, just guts. Up they went, gliding low, engines off, just the sound of the wind and maybe a prayer or two. The sky above was smeared with smoke, and out on the horizon you could see the fields burning. That dirty orange glow that never meant anything good. They slipped through the dark like rumors, barely more than ghosts. One depot, boom, dead silent drop, then suddenly the whole place goes up. You ever heard a string of ammo go? It's like a demon playing with firecrackers. Germans ran out half-dressed, wild-eyed, spraying bullets at shadows. Too late. The witches were already gone, swallowed up by the black. And they kept doing it, night after night, like some insane clockwork. One German officer wrote home. Letter got found after the war said, "We are fighting ghosts. We hear them, we fear them, but we cannot kill them." Not even being dramatic either. Those women sometimes flew a dozen, even 15 missions in one night. Came back with frostbite, windburn, the works, but somehow they just kept going. It wasn't all heroics though. The more chaos they caused, the more the Germans turned up the pressure. Searchlights everywhere, flak thick as flies. You had stories like Irina Sabrova flew through a barrage so intense everyone on the ground figured she was toast. But nope, her battered plane limped home, holes and all. Woman racked up over 1,000 missions, absolute legend. But yeah, not everyone made it back. The empty bunks started to add up. Commander Bershinskaya, steel backbone, but you could see it in her face. Every loss hit hard. Still, she held it together, kept everyone moving. When someone asked how they handled it, one pilot just shrugged. "We had no choice. War didn't give us one." That's it, no drama, just truth. Sleep? Please, they grabbed minutes where they could, half an hour here, a catnap there. Faces pale, eyes sunken, hands stiff from the cold control sticks. Some of them started dreaming in colorless flashes, engines whining, bombs dropping. The whole thing replaying on a loop. Wake up, strap in, do it again. Like there wasn't even a line between sleep and flying anymore. Still, even in the grind, they found ways to flip the bird at fate. They'd scratch messages into the balls, stuff like, "For my brother," "For Stalingrad," "For Mother Russia." Little acts of rebellion falling from the sky in flames. The Germans never cracked the code. Their planes were too fast, their guns too slow. The night witches just kept slipping through the cracks. And the worst part? The fear. It crept in, settled in German guts. Some units flat out refused to camp in the open anymore. Didn't want to be out there when the ghost came hunting. And who could blame them? The night belonged to the witches, and everyone knew it. By late 43, the script had totally flipped. The Soviets were storming west, grinding out every inch they'd lost. And you better believe the night witches were right there with them, gliding right into the thick of enemy turf. These women racked up flights like nobody's business, flinging more explosives than you could count, and making their rickety biplanes the stuff of Nazi nightmares. Fragile? Please. They turned that fragility into something straight up fearsome. But you know, war isn't just stats and headlines. For these women, it was way more personal. The smoke-stained face of a friend who didn't make it back, the gnawing emptiness of skipped meals, nightmares that stuck around long after the engines cut out. Heroes? Sure. but also just girls, some not even old enough to legally buy a drink, living years' worth of pain before most people even figure out who they are. The Germans never stopped hurling insults. Which is this, which is that. But back home, the Red Army saw them for what they were, absolute icons of guts. Guys in the dirt, freezing and scared, would hear the soft hum of those Po-2s overhead and know, hey, we're not totally screwed, someone's still out there fighting with us. And as 43 bled into 44, the Night Witches just kept pushing west, one silent run after another. Poland, Germany, straight into the monster's den. Night was their playground, and that whole broomstick legend only got sharper the further they flew. By 44, the Soviets weren't just pushing back, they were steamrolling west. The grim retreat days? Gone. Now it was the Red Army shoving the Germans out, boot prints in the cinders of Russian towns, rolling into the wild tangle of Eastern Europe. Every inch gained, though, just dialed the madness up. The Germans, cornered and mean, torched everything on their way out. Villages, charred, bridges, blown sky high, rivers might as well have been molten, and in the thick of this chaos, the Night Witches soared. Those women of the 588th? They weren't rookies anymore. Night after night in the cockpit had worn them raw, hands tough as old leather, faces chiseled by wind and straight-up exhaustion. Girlhood? That was ancient history. They'd flown more missions than anyone could count. Climbing into their rickety planes didn't scare them now. They wore death like an old jacket. Honestly, the war had carved them into something else. Shadows, hunters, night's own ghosts. Now their orders sent them deeper. Poland, Belarus, Ukraine, flying over forests crawling with enemy patrols and villages dense with trigger-happy Germans. Danger was just the background noise. Searchlights sliced the dark, flak guns spat hell, and German fighters hunted the clouds. But somehow the witches kept slipping through, dropping silent doom on whatever target command threw their way. There's this one mission everyone talked about. Summer 4 outside Warsaw, a German supply depot locked down tighter than a drum. Searchlights everywhere, anti-aircraft guns itching for a fight. A suicide run, basically. Yet the witches showed up anyway. Engines off, gliding low, ducking under the spotlights. German beams crisscrossed above, but those old Po-2s danced out of reach, canvas wings almost invisible. And then, boom, bombs in a steady rhythm, 2, 4, 6, lighting up the night. Ammo went up, the whole depot torched. Germans fired wildly, but the witches had already melted back into the dark. Like ghosts, for real. People said you could see that fire for miles. The Germans? Paralyzed for days. The women came back wrung out, wings riddled with bullet holes, but every single one of them made it home. They got medals, top-tier Soviet stuff. Didn't make them any less tired, though. By then, the Night Witches were legends. Soviet papers ran their stories. Propaganda posters plastered their faces. Even folks in newly freed villages whispered about them. Kids watched in awe as leather-helmeted women climbed out of battered planes. Witches to the Germans, but heroes to everyone else. Proof that sometimes, when the world's breaking apart, the toughest souls show up where you least expect. Gotta say, the scars those witches carried, not the kind you can see. Outsiders had no clue. Every single night took its pound of flesh. Friends buried in dirt that wasn't theirs, graves marked with busted propellers, or just a scrap of wood hammered into the ground. Real cheerful stuff. Survivor's guilt? Oh, they wore it like a second skin. Hunger, bone-deep exhaustion, terror that clung to them like a second shadow. None of it spoken out loud. Some of them coped by cranking up the volume. Laughter, singing, squeezing every drop out of life because, honestly, tomorrow was a coin flip. Others just zoned out, eyes locked on the fire, probably seeing ghosts in the flames. And yet, they kept flying. Those rickety death traps carried them deeper and deeper into Europe. Skimming over the Belarus forests, wolves howling down below like some twisted fairy tale. Crossing rivers in Poland, where bridges lay busted, bones in the water. Then over Germany itself, dropping bombs, making themselves known in the worst way. By this point, the Germans had stopped pretending these women didn't exist. Fear was out in the open. They even put out a bounty: shoot down a witch, get the Iron Cross. Sure, meant as a pep talk, but honestly just screamed, "We have no idea how to stop you." For everyone they managed to bring down, a whole swarm flew back, silent and stubborn as ever. Rumors spread like brush fire. There was this story, maybe true, maybe not, about a witch who got her plane shredded by bullets, the thing on fire, and she still managed to crash it straight into a convoy, taking a bunch of enemy trucks with her. Fact or fiction? Didn't matter. To the guys on the ground, it just made the witches seem even scarier. Still, the missions kept coming. They'd fly in pairs, sometimes threes, zigzagging through flak, dropping their payloads, melting into the night. Every run added to the legend, every soft whoosh of their wings making German soldiers sweat a little harder in their bunkers. By late '44, the Red Army was closing in on Germany. The witches followed, their planes groaning under the strain. Everyone knew their name by now. The jokes and snickering, long gone. Now they were the stuff of nightmares, a storm that arrived with the dark. Thing is, the price just kept climbing. More and more didn't make it home. Planes vanished. Names got crossed out for good. But even with death breathing down their necks, the night witches never quit. They started as girls fighting for a sliver of survival. By now, living, breathing legends chasing the war right up to its bitter, bloody finish. And everybody, especially the Germans, understood one thing. When the sun went down, the witches would be there. No doubt about it. By '45, the Reich was basically on its last legs. Barely standing, honestly. The Red Army? Man, they just barreled west. A steamroller of bodies, tanks, and guns flattening everything in their path. Cities that used to shake in fear at the sight of German boots were now nothing but smoking ruins, thanks to Soviet shelling. The end was right there, hanging in the air. But those last few months, just brutal. No other way to put it. Germans fought like cornered animals, clawing for every crumbling street, every muddy field, every pile of bricks. And up above, the witches kept coming. The 508th Night Bomber Regiment, yeah, the famous Night Witches. Their final chapter? It was hell. Their ancient Po-2s, patched up with whatever was lying around, squeaked and shuddered with each mission. The women flying them? Utterly wrecked. Gaunt, eyes hollow, you'd never guess they'd once been teenagers. Still, they just kept going. Orders were orders. Keep moving west, hit the Germans wherever they tried to dig in. Through Poland, then East Prussia, then right into Germany's backyard, the Night Witches dropped their payloads. Their nightly raids turned into a living nightmare for the enemy. Supply lines blown up, retreating troops scattered, pure chaos in the rear. Even with defeat staring them in the face, German soldiers still muttered about the witches. They called them demons, swore death itself rode on those rickety broomsticks. As the front moved closer to Berlin, the missions got crazier. The women flew deeper and deeper, right over cities that barely existed anymore. Just skeletons of buildings. Berlin, once this untouchable fortress, was getting pummeled from all sides. And at dawn, some poor German private would jerk awake to the soft whir of wings overhead. No rest for the wicked, right? But let's be real, every flight was a gamble. The German sky was packed with flak, and those old wooden biplanes? About as protective as wet cardboard. The witches hugged the earth, zigzagged between trees, engines coughing and sputtering. Some limped back full of holes, leaking fuel, hands shaking so bad they could barely climb out of the cockpit. Others, well, they didn't come back. By then, loss was just part of the job. The women grieved in silence, buckled in, and went up again. What else could they do? Take Nadezhda Popova, for example. 17 sorties in one night. Yeah, 17. Up, engine off, silent glide, bombs away, rinse and repeat, all night long. When she finally landed, frost clinging to her uniform, face raw from the wind, she just shrugged and said, "I am alive." Sometimes that's enough. War was gasping its last, but the witches weren't done until it was really over. Spring '45, they flew their final missions over Germany, bombing what was left of the Reich's broken heart. And then, finally, May 9th, Victory Day. The guns shut up, tanks stopped grinding forward, and for the first time in ages, the night was actually quiet. When the witches rolled back in, there was no parade, no big speeches. Some cried, some cracked jokes, some just stared at the sunrise, trying to wrap their heads around the fact that it was finished. Against all odds, they'd made it. Over 3,000 sorties, more than 23,000 tons of bombs dropped. Most decorated women's unit in Soviet history. But damn, the price was steep. Dozens of their friends never made it home. Their names scattered across Europe, carved into wooden crosses in cold stone, far from anything familiar. Eventually, people started calling them legends. The Germans? Man, they'd get goosebumps just thinking about those broomsticks buzzing around in the dark. The Soviets tossed out medals, but surprise, surprise, not every hero got their due. Gotta love a man's war, right? Most of these women just melted back into regular life, keeping their battle scars tucked away. Some ended up teaching kids or tinkering with engines, raising families. But deep down, still witches, just not the fairy tale kind. And their legacy? Oh, it's stubborn. It hides in the wind's whisper, in that almost inaudible swoop across a black sky. They smashed the lie that courage belongs to just one gender. Weakness? They twisted it into power. They turned silence into fear. The night witches didn't just show up. They crashed the boys' club, kicked the doors off the hinges, and left their mark forever. So next time you hear the wind rattling outside at night, remember, it might just be a memory of those women who weaponized a breeze. The night witches, don't forget them.